Let's move to the next topic, that is immutable class. What is immutable class? Immutable class is a class for which once we create the object with certain values, and then after if we will try to modify the object or if we will try to modify the values of that object, we are not allowed to do that. And that type of class is known as immutable class, and that object is known as immutable object. Now the question is, when we need to create that type of class or when we need to use immutable object. There are two main reasons when we need to create immutable class or immutable object in real world scenarios. Reason number one is sometimes you want to prevent your class object from unauthorized access. You want to prevent it to modify from some unauthorized access. If you have that concern, then you can use immutable class. You can create immutable object so that once that will get initialized, no one will be able to modify it. That's the first reason or requirement when we need to use immutable class. The second reason to use immutable class is sometimes in a multi-threaded environment when you are sharing one object in multiple threads, then there is a high possibility of data inconsistency problem. What is data inconsistency? You are going to learn it in multi-threading concept, but as of now, you can understand like this that data inconsistency is a problem that can be occur when you are sharing one object in multiple threads and multiple threads are making changes in the same object. So to prevent from this, if you want to secure your object from data inconsistency problem, then you can go with this concept called immutable class. Immutable class are by nature thread safe. So when you are using immutable class, you are using immutable class object that will initialize once only, and there will never be a possibility of data inconsistency thing. So that is the second main reason why we need to use immutable class. Now let's try to understand how we can create custom immutable class. To create custom immutable class, we have to follow some of the rules. Rule number one says that you have to make class as final. Why we are making class final? So that the class will not be inheritable and no one will be try to modify the existing functionalities in child class. And in that way, we are preventing our class to be modified anywhere, even in child class as well. We are preventing our class to be further inherit and we are making the class final. That's the rule number one. Rule number two says that we have to make the data members inside the class as private only. Why we are making the private data members? Because if we are making them private, those will be accessible within a class only. No one will be make or access them outside the class by using association and will not be able to access them directly in other classes and not be able to make changes in them directly. So for that reason, we are making the data members private. Rule number third says that we have to make those data members as final. Means we are making blank final data members, which means that once those will initialize, then those will be fixed with the values. Those will become constants. So no one will be able to modify them. The next point is we must not have to create any setter methods in immutable class because setter methods are used to modify the existing properties of the class, right? But if we are not allowing anyone to make modifications in properties, then we must have to remove all the setter methods from our class. That's the next rule. And the last rule says that we must have to create a parameterized constructor which will take the parameters, which will take the values and assign them or initialize our properties of the class so that those will be initialized once by constructor and then those will become fixed. No one will be further able to modify them. These are the rules that we must have to follow in order to create immutable class. Now let's see the implementation of them. I have created a person class as an immutable class. First of all, I make the class as final. Then I have made all the properties as private and final. Reason I already explained you. Then I didn't define any setter method here. Only the getter methods which are basically providing the access of the properties are only available, but no one will be able to set the values to these properties. Okay, then last, we have a constructor here which is basically taking the property values and then assigning them to my properties. Mainly it is initializing the person class object with certain values. So these are the rules that I am implementing here, and this is a pure immutable class example. Now there is a question: that generally asked in interviews. Is there any way that we can break the immutability of class? If is there any way, then what is that scenario? Explain this. This is a very repeatedly asked interview question. Let's see what is the scenario when immutability of a class can be break. This could be possible if your class is holding the reference of some other class and that class is mutable class. Let's see this implementation. I have immutable student class which is holding ID, name and address. Address is of address class type. Okay, this class is purely immutable class having final class type. All the data members are of private and final type. I'm initializing the properties by constructor. I didn't define any setter method. This is purely immutable class, right? But the problem is this address is of mutable class type. You can see this is address and this is having these properties, but this is not immutable class. Okay, now let's see what will happen. What I am doing is I want to instantiate immutable class object, this object. To instantiate the object, I need to pass three properties, ID and name. These are the primitive type of property I can easily pass, but to pass the address, I need to first create address class object. So let's do this. In main class, I am first creating address class object, passing the city name, state name, and some pin code. And this is how I'm instantiating the address class object. Then I'm creating immutable class object and I'm passing this address reference here. Okay. Then what I'm doing is I'm simply getting the address object from student class by calling this get address method. This is returning me address class object. And then by using that address class object, I can call methods that are defined inside the address class. So there is a method inside address class that is get code. If you can see, this method is defined inside address class. Okay, now this is giving me address value, which is pin code basically. So I'm just printing here the address pin code of certain student. Okay, now what I do is again I say student dot get address and getting the address object, and once I get the address object I can call set code because setter method is defined inside address class. I can call set code method and can pass some address which is pin code and then change the address code pin code, and then again I'll print that address value. You can see I'm getting the address reference because get address method is there in student class, and by using that address reference, because my address class is not immutable, I am able to modify changes in address class object values. And then after modification, if I'll again print the student address, you can see before modification the address was something else, but after modification I'm having different address, which means that in student class, if I try to make modification in address class object value, I'm easily able to achieve this because address class is a mutable class. And this is how immutability of my student class is getting break. Now let's try to understand how we can prevent our immutability of the class. What we simply need to do is we have to go to my mutable class type, which is address class, and there I need to implement clonable interface and override clone method. Okay, so that in case if I need the object clone of address class, I can simply achieve that. And then in next step, what I need to do is in my getter method, get address method of immutable class, there I will not directly return my address object reference. Instead of that, I'll create the address object clone, and then that clone object I'm going to return from here. So in that way, when someone will call get address, I'm not directly sharing the same address here. Instead of that, I'm deattaching this address object reference with return address object reference. Okay, now let's see this how it is going to impact my code. I'm creating address object, right? Setting up the values. Let's suppose the address reference is 1000. Then I'm passing this 1000 there in the immutable class object. And then when I'll call get address, that get address is going to execute, and this is going to create another address object which might be of 2000 reference with the same values. Okay, and then when I set the value, that value will be set to that another object which is of 2000 address. Okay, but still the 1000 address values are still the same. If I again call student.getAddress and get code, the address is remain same as it was previously there. Okay, let's run this. You can see even after the modification, the values are still remain same. And this is because you have make changes in another object, because on calling of get address, you are not getting the same address object reference. Instead of that, you are getting clone of the same address object, and you are making changes in that clone object, not that real object one. And that's how we are preventing immutability of our class. To fix this problem, I have to do one more thing. That is, when I'm passing this address object reference 1000, this 1000 reference I was taking here and directly assigning to my class level variable. And that's why the same address reference was sharing here in my immutable student class as well as there in my main method. Okay, so to avoid this problem, what I need to do, when I'll receive 1000 address object reference, I'll create a clone on that address object, so that I'll create another address object, let's say 2000 reference with the same values, and that address I'll assign to my class level variable. So in that way, that address object I was passing from here is kind of de-attached with my student immutable class address reference. Now because my immutable student class is holding another address reference, and the address reference that I passed from here was different one. Let's say this is 1000, and in immutable student the address reference is 2000. However, the values are same because I create clone there before I assign the new object to my address reference. Okay, so now if I try to make changes in this address 1000 address reference, then the values will be only changed to this 1000 address reference. Still my immutable class student is remain same. So what I am doing is I am printing the code of my student class before modification, and then after modification again I am printing the student object. And let's see this time. You can see before modification the code was 1 2 3 4 5, and then after modification still my code is 1 2 3 4 5. These modifications are only make on this address object, not that shared one which is there inside my student class. Okay, so this is how we can prevent immutability of the class. In case if your class is holding some mutable reference, then you have to deattach the reference in the constructor by doing deep cloning. And when you are calling get address method also, you have to again deattach the address reference by creating the clone and then returning that. So while inserting it, we will create the clone and assign that clone to my class level data member. And when we call get address, there also we will create the clone and we will return the clone object reference. So we will never ever share the actual address or the same address between two different reference variables. And this is how we can prevent our immutability of the class.